All right, I can still see people joining this webinar, so I'll start a bit slow so people have the chance to still come in. Welcome to this webinar. This webinar is called Karger Publishers Publish and Read Onboarding Webinar 2021. It's a webinar we do in cooperation with Enago. So on this call, we have Tony O'Rourke from Enago, who will do a presentation on open science and open access. I'll start with a very short introduction. I'll start with myself. My name is Julia. I'm the Karger manager for academic and research institutions. Also on the call, we have my colleague Gregor. He's our regional office for the German-speaking markets. He will join us in a second. On this call is also our open access manager. Her name is Beth. If you have any questions for any one of us, please feel free to type them into the chat box and we will get around to them. As you might see, I'm not in an office. I'm actually at home. So if you hear meowing in the background, that's my cat, that's not me. So please, I hope it's not too annoying. After this webinar, we will have a short survey. If you have the time and the opportunity to fill that out for us, we would be very grateful. So let's look at what we're going to look at today. So our webinar has 4 different sections. We will start with a very short introduction to Karger Publishers, which my colleague Gregor will do. Then we have Tony's presentation on open access and open science. The third element will be, we will take a look at what open access means for Karger. And the final element will be, if you have a publish and read agreement already in place with us, or you're thinking about starting a publish and read agreement with us, we'll take a look at how can you make this agreement most beneficial for you and for your researchers. At the end, we will have a question and answer section. We'll try to get to all the questions that you put into the chat. And try and answer any of your questions that you might have. I also would like to take a moment to say that this meeting will be recorded. We will make all the material of this meeting available to you after this meeting is done. You will get an email with the material that we're presenting you with. And without further ado, I would hand over to my colleague Gregor.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gregor. I'm joining from Basel, Switzerland. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm Karger's contact for the German-speaking countries and South Africa. I will give you just a short outlook on who Karger Publishers is. Please, the next slide. Karger's mission is connecting and advancing health sciences. Karger is Swiss, independent, family-owned, and we have a woman at the top, Gabriela Karger. She belongs to the 4th generation of the Karger family. We are 100% focused on health sciences with more than 100 journals, of which nearly 1/3 is already open access. We are switching about 5 to 10 subscription journals to Gold Open Access each year. Please, next slide. The heart of Karger Publishers is beating in the wonderful town of Basel in Switzerland, but we have offices and representatives all around the world. Being close to our customers is one of our basic values, especially in times of lockdown and home office. This becomes even more important. Next slide, please. What are our ambitions in the coming years? It's not enough to just publish high-level articles in the field of biomedicine. We want to be part of the cycle of knowledge in health sciences for researchers, physicians, doctors, and patients. We strongly believe that libraries and publishers are sitting in the same boat and that we have a joint mission, helping knowledge reach the people who need it. Open access is a game changer, we all know. It's our ambition to discuss with you today new roles and new services in the open access world. Next slide, please. Well, having ambitions is not enough, I would say. What is in there for you and your users? On the right side, you see the cycle of knowledge as we understand it. Very smart people think about new research projects. They try to find out what other researchers discovered in their field of interest. By making experiments, they discover new insights and analyze them. To validate the new findings, they need to interact with other researchers. And finally, they will have them published and they will share the new knowledge with the scientific community. Their professional career depends on the attention received for their research. Right in the middle of the circle, that's where you find Karger Publishers. That's where we want to be. We want to give support to the smart people, offering PACs. PACs is an abbreviation you will hear several times in this webinar. PACs stands for Publish, Access, Curate, and Services. You may wonder what is behind that, and this I will show to you on the next slide, please. PACs offers 4 modules which give help to your users in the cycle of knowledge. Help them to publish by offering APC vouchers, which simplify the publishing process to a high degree for them. Become part of a publish-read agreement, or why not start a new journal, which helps your institution to be more visible in the community. Access, the A of PACs, stands for the traditional offer for content in journal and ebooks. If your users are interested, especially in one topic, for example, in diabetes, we can arrange access to all articles related to this topic. What does curation stand for? We want to help you and your users to get more information and insights out of your data. Our latest project is QInsight, a search engine for biomedical literature, which uses artificial intelligence. The S at last stands for more services. We started together with our partner Enago, an online platform for students and young researchers, which helps them to improve their publishing skills and have more success when submitting their manuscripts. I thank you for your attention to this short outlook on Karger Publishers. Feel free to contact me or my colleagues for more information. And please don't forget to ask questions. I will be the one introducing your questions to our experts at the end of this webinar. There is no stupid questions, as my teacher used to say. Now it's my pleasure to pass the word to Tony from our partner Enago, who will lead us into the world of open science and open access.
Thank you very much, Gregor. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Bristol here in England. My name is Tony O'Rourke, and I'm Vice President for Partnerships with Enago. In case you don't know who we are, we're one of the world's leading providers of academic author services, which includes things like editing, academic manuscripts, medical manuscripts, translation. We do a huge amount of medical translation, for example, as well as education and learning, resources to improve the knowledge of the researcher when it comes to the whole scholarly communication process. And we also provide AI tools that support the workflow. I'm going to turn my screen off. I'm going to turn my head off in a minute, so you'll only see my screen. The presentation today will focus on open science and open access. I'm sure some of you will know this already. Some of you will know this better than I do, so bear with me. And as Gregor said, any questions, please use the questions box and I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So we're going to be looking at four, I'm going to be looking at four main topics in this session of the webinar. Open science and the future of science being open, open access publishing, which is a natural manifestation of open science, the phenomenon of open data and why it's important, and looking at different types of open licensing. And of course, my colleagues from Karger will be going into more detail specifically around the Karger open licensing programs. Next slide, please. So the fundamental behind open access publishing is free, unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed scholarly research content output. More access to research benefits authors, readers, as well as funders, as it increases the reach for the research to a wider audience and makes a better impact, hopefully, on science and on society. Open science is a really important step towards creating greater openness, sharing integrity, collaboration, and reproducibility in scholarly research. Next slide. So there are 6 main elements to open science, and we're going to be looking at 2 of these today. These are open data, open access, open peer review, open methodology, open source software, and open educational resources. All feed into the greater concept of open science. FYI, if any of you are interested, Enago runs free webinars on open science, and I'll be happy to share details on our forthcoming webinars for anyone who'd like to know more about some of these other subject areas. But let's look at the topics that we're going to be focusing on today. Next slide, please. So the whole element of open science is that it touches on every area that the researcher is engaged with as part of that whole research process, whether it's the hypothesis and how they're going to get the money to prove their hypothesis and the rules that the funding bodies are now increasingly setting around data clarification, clarifying usage rights and how usage should be more open and ensuring that citations are appropriate. Processing, making sure that the open source software is being used and open interfaces are being used to be able to allow for greater reproducibility and checking of data. Data storage, the use of persistent identifiers to make content discoverable, the use of descriptive metadata, and using and publishing that metadata with an open license. Open science also informs issues around long-term preservation, standard metadata, and using services that safeguard the preservation and integrity of materials. It defines and influences and how content can be reused. And importantly, and perhaps the main part of this talk today, is that it influences impacts on the way content is distributed and published. And I say published in the widest possible sense, how repositories are being used and should be used, using open evaluation methodologies, and ensuring links between publications, data, and methods in an open way. So let's move to the next slide, which is around the whole topic specifically of open access publishing. Next video. So Spark defined, this is going back a few years now, I'm old so I can remember this. Spark defined open access as the free, immediate online availability of research articles combined with the rights to use these articles fully in a digital environment. Spark's ambitions back in the early noughties took some time to be realized, but I think we're kind of there. So at the beginning of the 1990s and before that, there were a lot of pressures on how content could be used and funded. Open access has been a topic for a long time. Before the internet, scientists were very keen to share their research findings with colleagues and peers, regardless of whether they had subscription to those print journals or not. And they wanted to share that. They wanted to share their knowledge, their latest findings, with their community. So they would send by post copies of articles or copies of papers that they'd written. This led to the development, and that's a pre-publication. It was also referred to as a preprint. So the very first electronic preprint server started in 1991 at the Los Alamos National Laboratory with Dr. Paul Ginspark, the physics archive. And later in the decade, we saw the emergence of the first open access journals where content was available to all without need for subscription. And many of these titles, such as Optics Express, New Journal of Physics, which I worked on in my time when I was at the Institute of Physics, are still very active and successful journals in their own right today. However, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and someone has to pay for the cost of making that content available. There was huge pressure on institutional budgets, particularly for larger institutions. And moving forward into the last 10 to 15 years, that pressure didn't go away, with pressure on institutions to pay APCs as well as subscription budgets. Faculties asked libraries to support new scholarly communication models. But as libraries had limited budgets in the 1990s, they were unable to subscribe to all the major journals that they needed. I mean, this goes back, you could argue, to the 1920s. No library ever has enough money to buy all the journals that they need. So that pressure, that demand from users, that growth in research, that continued growth in research, and that inability to be able to fund the subscription charges of some of these journals, plus the introduction of APCs, was putting a huge amount of pressure. So really this led to the development of the open access movement, a response to increased pricing and the reduced capability to pay for content needed by their research communities. Let's move on to the open access model itself. The first three blocks at the top are true regardless of how the content is made available. When content is publicly funded, the researcher writes up their content and wants to share that content with their research community. The manuscripts are then submitted to a journal, whether it's open access or not, and if they're accepted, and then a decision is made as to whether to accept or reject that manuscript for publication. So open access changes the model somewhat, in that with the open access model, increasingly the author is retaining the right to retain that data and granting the publisher a license to publish. Those fees, the authors may be required to pay an article processing charge to cover the publishing costs, and those fees can range hugely from the hundreds of dollars to, in some cases, over $10,000 for some very, very high profile journals. But it led to published versions of articles being made immediately accessible. Earlier on in the development of open access, there was and still is in some cases, an embargo period before that content was made available, but paying an APC made that content freely available. And thanks to the introduction of new license types, such as Creative Commons, it granted a reuse rights more openly, so that content could be shared, and ultimately leading to an acceleration in scientific progress and hopefully maximizing the return on public investment. Let's look at the different routes, the different types of open access. This only talks about green and gold, but there are other types, as I'm sure many of you will know. Gold OA makes the final version of an article freely and permanently accessible for everyone immediately after publication. Copyright for the article is retained more and more by the author. That's still not the case with every single journal, but it's becoming increasingly the norm that the author can retain their rights, and most of the permission barriers are removed. Gold OA articles can be published either in fully open access journals, where all the content is published OA, or in hybrid journals, which, as I'm sure you all know, is a combination of subscription-based journal, which allows for certain APC paid for articles to be made available to a broader audience because an APC fee has been paid. Green open access, often referred to as self-archiving, is the practice of placing a version of an author's manuscript into a repository or some other location, making it freely accessible to everyone. The version that can be deposited in a repository is often dependent on the funder or the publisher. Some publishers will insist that the final published version should not be placed in the repository, but again, we're seeing those kind of strict rules beginning to loosen, so that the actual final published version may start to be published in repositories after a given period of time. Unlike gold open access, copyright for these articles may still reside with the funding agency or the publisher. There may be restrictions to how certain gold open access articles are used. There are also individual self-archiving policies by journal that the publisher determines the conditions of use, which article version should be made available, and when the article can be made openly accessible in the repository. There's also platinum open access. And platinum open access means permanent and free access to published scientific works for readers with no publication fees for the authors. It's 100% free. I mean, there are a number of good examples of platinum open access journals, particularly from certain learned societies who are covering the costs of those journals from their other subscription journal products. So in those particular cases, there's no APC, there are no publication fees, no fees whatsoever. The costs are covered by the journal owner. Excuse me. Let's move to the next slide. So what are the benefits of open access publishing? This is true today as much as it was when the movement really started to gain momentum 20 years ago. It's about visibility, wider dissemination of research. It's about immediacy, ensuring that published knowledge is available immediately for use, and not just by those people who can afford to pay for the subscription to those journals. It should increase the citation and references for articles that are published open, higher citations, and ultimately leading, hopefully, to greater impact. Reproducibility. Open access simplifies the verification of published results by making that data more openly available. It allows for greater public outreach, participation by the public in the research process more readily. It allows for greater global access to the content. Countries with fewer resources can also access current scientific knowledge, and there's some great examples of organizations such as Hinari, INASP, etc., who work with publishers, work with societies to make content available at low cost or no cost to researchers in, for want of a better term, developing countries. There's also an access, a state benefit to open access, and it makes research funding more transparent and seeing the value and use of the research funds and how it can benefit a broader community. And arguably, it can lead to better policy making, better decisions being made on access to the current scientific knowledge. A really good example of open access recently, or particularly green open access, was the action taken by many publishers to make COVID-19 related research free to all. Arguably, again, this helped in the development of vaccines and treatments because it was those labs working on those new vaccines didn't necessarily need to have subscriptions to the journals to read that new content. Next slide, please. So we move on to open data. The fundamental behind open access publishing is free, unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed scholarly research output. Open access to research benefits authors, readers, as well as funders, and increases the reach to a wider audience and makes a better impact on society and on science, as we've said earlier. And it's a step towards more openness, greater integrity, collaboration, and reproducibility. So what is open data? Open data is content in its simplest form, which is available to access, use and share by anyone who is interested. Now, if we go to the next slide for a second, I'll only briefly touch on this. This was a classifier which was created by Tim Berners-Lee, and he defined data in, I beg your pardon, no, I'll tell you about, this isn't Tim Berners-Lee, that's the latest slide, I'm reading the wrong thing, so let me go back. So there are ultimately 5 categories of data. Open data is data that can be freely reused, used, redistributed, and intermixed with other data sets by anyone, anywhere, for any purpose. To access certain access to open data may be controlled through access restrictions, through licenses, through copyrights, patents, and charges for reuse. But open data means that data that's been collected to validate, evidence that's been collected to validate research is more openly available and reusable. Next slide, please. This is the Tim Berners-Lee. We go to the last bit. Thank you. This is the Tim Berners-Lee classifier. If a researcher decides to make their data open, this provides an overview of what that researcher needs to consider. 1 star is making that data available just on the web. 2-star, data available in a structured format, right through to 5-star, which is linking your data to other types of data. So, next slide. What is the significance of open data? What are the benefits? Firstly, open data can enable and initiate new collaborations, perhaps with other researchers who are previously outside the researcher's own network. Secondly, excuse me, it makes it easier to validate the credibility and authenticity of research if others are able to test the data for themselves. It should ensure transparency and reproducibility. It enables data to be credited in addition to results and conclusions. Many publishers are now insisting that published articles are linked to the data set that was used to reach those findings, so that other readers, other researchers can validate the findings for themselves. Many funding bodies now insist that data resulting from their funded research is made open as part of their funding criteria. And of course, if data is made open for others to validate and reproduce, it can and should lead to other types of research. Next slide. Here we're going to talk about licensing, which is an important aspect of practicing open science. By applying a license to a research output, the researcher can remove any ambiguity of what others can do and can't do with their work. Next slide. One aspect of licensing is around copyright, which a copyright is just one form of a right, one form of an intellectual property right. Copyright is a legal exclusive right given to the creator of an idea or work to reproduce it. It's simply a form of intellectual property protection for the copyright holder. In the pre-open access and Creative Commons days, an author would assign all rights of the paper to the publisher in exchange for being published in their journal. Of course, with the advent of Creative Commons licenses, CC, and more relaxed thinking on the part of the publisher, the author more typically, as we said earlier, can retain the right to their work and simply assigns a right to use the work to the publisher, leaving the author free to share the paper or versions of the paper on personal, institutional, or subject repositories. So let's move to the next slide. So effectively, when it comes to open licensing, there are 3 types of license or rights license. The copyright, which is the exclusive legal right given to the creator. The content where the exclusive rights with the publisher or the author, and permissions must be given to reuse the content. That's the historical old use, and is still used by some journals today. The Creative Commons creates a set of licenses that give permission to use and share creative work based on the creator's stated conditions. Different CC licenses give different permissions to use and share works based on the creator's own stated conditions and the type of license used by the content owner. And there are variations in the CC license, including restrictions such as whether that content can be used for commercial purposes or not. And I would urge you, if you have an interest in licensing, to look at the many different types of Creative Commons licensing at the Creative Commons website. And of course, there's content that sits in the public domain. This is content here in Europe and in the US, which where there's, for example, a 70-year rule, and that content enters the public domain 70 years after the death of the author, or if the work of corporate authorship, 95 years. It's where content works that were never or are no longer protected by copyright, for example, government publications or works with expired copyrights. So for my last two slides, I just want to touch on, or last slide I should say, on the benefits of the read and publish as a type of license, the Read and Publish initiative. This new type of license is often referred to as a transformative license, and it's intended to make it possible to read content traditionally covered under a subscription license, and also publish by paying an APC, so that anyone within that licensing group may read and publish in a defined group of journals for a fixed annual fee, often paid for by an institution or by a funding body, or sometimes in certain countries by the government itself. It shifts the contracted payment from a library or group of libraries to a publisher away from subscription-based reading and towards open access. So, and there's some really good examples of the Read and Publish initiative. The Karger one, of course, project deal in Germany, which is a deal between effectively every German university and Wiley. The benefits of the Read and Publish initiative is that it means that the publishing process can be streamlined into a seamless guided workflow for authors. It provides seamless open access publishing opportunities in top journals, which perhaps otherwise may not be accessible. It requires payment of a single fee that will fold APCs into an overall license or contract. Institutions and authors will then receive wider coverage for their articles because their content will be made open. It boosts readership and visibility of articles published by institutional authors. It provides a route for easier compliance for funders and for funding mandates. Institutions can more effortlessly monitor open access publishing outputs, and should lead to access to high impact and high quality research in, as we say, in those higher impact journals. So by having their research freely accessible to the public, researchers benefit from greater impact, higher visibility, higher citation rates, and better chances to increase their network and to obtain funds. That's kind of all I have to say. Let me now move back to Julia to continue this webinar.
All right, thank you very much, Tony. So we've looked at open access and open science, and now we want to take a closer look of what open access means for Karger. So Karger has become quite progressive in the context of open access. Obviously, as Gregor put it, we are in the heart of Europe, and Europe is very strong in the open access movement. So this is one of the points that drives us towards becoming an open access publisher. We do have a designated open access team that consists of various people from various parts of our company. My colleague Beth is on this call, and she will be available for questions later on. Our open access team deals with things like preparing Karger for the future, strategic questions, as well as policy questions when it comes to open access. Me doing this presentation means I want to focus on more of maybe the practical aspects of what open access means for us in the context of what can we provide our customers with. As I mentioned at the beginning, my job is I'm responsible for academic customers basically worldwide, and that is also where one of the most pressing difficulties for us comes in, and that is the world is moving and evolving at very different speeds. So as I mentioned, you have very fast moving markets in Europe. On the other hand, you have let's say Asia, Africa, and also the Americas being rather maybe moving slower into the direction of open access. Open access has become maybe the major part of the Karger strategy. We have always been a publisher that was very close to our partners, and we define partners not only as institutions or customers, but also as our authorship. We want to use our transition to open access to strengthen these partnerships. We want to find solutions that fit our partners and that maybe help both sides moving towards open access and finding solutions. How do we advance open access? I can give you a couple of rather practical examples. We do have a very generous green policy, for example. We try and find solutions if an author has special funder requests. We try and support them in any way possible. Gregor has already mentioned that we are actively flipping our portfolio to open access. That means we're moving our subscription journals into or towards being gold open access journals. So let's take a look at what publish and read actually means for Karger and what we understand publish and read agreements to be. So if you have already discussed a publish and read deal with us, you will probably know this already, so please bear with me. Our deals usually consist of either 2 or 3 modules, the standard being 3 rather than 2. So module 1 obviously would be publishing solutions. We do offer very different kinds of publishing solutions depending on the markets and depending on the funders in the market. So we have arrangements that range from numbered vouchers arrangements up to unlimited publishing options for like a whole nation. So it's quite a broad spectrum of solutions that we can offer. The second module would be access, and I have to say all our publish and read agreements are based on access to the complete e-journal content. We also have some agreements that include content that is part of the Karger ebook portfolio, but that would rather be the exception. The third module that we like to include in our deals is education. We have, in cooperation with Enago, we have a web-based platform that's called Karger Learn, and that is the content of Karger Learn is very useful to young authors that want to learn how to write scientific manuscripts and how to do research. We like to include the education module into our agreements because we find that it raises the quality of submissions and it helps making the submission process more seamless and more easy for the authors. As of more or less today, this list gives you an overview of the consortia and the customers that we have publish and read deals with. We expect there to be a couple of more deals in the upcoming weeks. Due to holidays, we've been running a bit late on paperwork, so I think this list will grow over the next week, but that is, as of today, the major institutes that we have deals with. You can see we are very strong in the European markets, but we also have pilot projects or consortia deals, for example, with Asian consortia, as well as customers in the Americas. And that kind of brings us to the final part of this presentation, and that is if you have a Karger publish and read agreement in place, how can you make the most of it? And we have structured this into 3 phases. It obviously starts with the setup phase. So the first step would be you contact either us or your respective regional Karger manager and discuss what kind of deal fits my institution, what kind of deal fits my institute's policies. Once that is set up, we will discuss with you what information do you want to have displayed on the Karger Open Access Agreement page. I will give you some insight into what that actually is in a second. And after that, we come to what experience has taught us is maybe the most difficult step, and that is informing faculty and staff about arrangements. We know there are some limitations in some markets. What we can offer is we can offer mailing templates that either we send or that we can give you for your use if you want to do the mailings directly. We do have publish and read banners that can be put on websites or printed out and put in the library in a non-COVID scenario. We can also issue press releases, which is something that our customers kind of request because they can put that out more easily than maybe mailings. These methods have proven quite successful in the past couple of years. I think our oldest publish and read agreement is now in its 6th year, so we do have some experience that we can benefit from when it comes to setting these up. The next phase that we would look at would be the launch phase. So what we can do is we can do like a hard launch, which means we could launch the agreement and then promote it, for example, with a webinar that's open for your authors and your researchers. What we also like to discuss, or what we like to provide potential authors with, is how do you actually submit to Karger? And we do have 2 step-by-step guidelines. We have a printout that you can send as a PDF, and that gives you a step-by-step guide. How do you submit a manuscript to the Karger platform? We will also have a video that is a step-by-step instruction for authors. Like, these are the things that you need to do, and that might even like raise your chances of being accepted. If you allow me a short detour, I will give you just a glimpse of how to submit to Karger. The submission process is quite lengthy, so I will not go through all these 10 points. I will focus on point number 5, which is the point that is most interesting or most special when someone has an open access agreement in place. Before I go through this, just some basic background. Submitting to Karger is about 98% the same process that any author has with any publisher website. So it's not a special Karger solution, but the process is basically the same for any publisher. Still, what we like to highlight to authors that have these agreements in place is just to clarify, these are the steps that are important, and do not forget to fill in the information that is required. So the first information that we're gathering is information on funding. As you can see, it's a drop-down menu, so the most common funders will be listed on this drop-down menu. If you do not have a funder, you have to select none. So we're trying to actually gather as much information on funding as we can. And this is basically the step that is maybe the most special step if an open access agreement is in place. I will start with the solution at the bottom, just because it's rarer than the one that we have on top. So I mentioned we have a handful of agreements that are voucher-based rather than your standard publish and read agreement where you don't have a voucher, but you have an agreement in place that you can benefit from. Should you have an agreement in place that is voucher-based, we have this little box on the bottom where you just type in the number that you have, and then that's that. So it's a pretty simple solution. On the top, we have the step that any author has to go through. So they have to select whether they are either eligible for an agreement, they want to opt out even though they are eligible, or they are not eligible. As you can see, there is a link out. That link out takes the authors to this site, which is the Funding and Institutional Open Access Agreement site. As you can see, we have sorted all the agreements that we have by country. Authors can also just use the search box and find their institution. And that is basically that. So it's, again, the submission process is standardized, and it is basically the same thing that you would also find with other publishers that have publish and read agreements that need to be highlighted within the submission process. All right, that brings us to the third and the final phase of how can you how can you make the most of your publish and read agreement? And that is the phase that we would call evaluation. We usually do the evaluation once a year. For new or pilot agreements, we also can do them twice a year or on a regular basis. What we do in the evaluation phase are a couple of, we take a look at a couple of indicators. So we generally send out regular publishing reports. That means reports that give information on how many articles were published within a specific time, so that the Institute has a very good overview of what's actually going into the agreement that they have. This reporting frequency can basically be determined by the customer. So we have customers that get reports monthly. We also have some that only want to see like the results at the end of the year. That is totally up to the customer. If we do the evaluation, what we look at are indicators of, for example, how many authors have chosen to opt out of an agreement, and are there any reasons why they prefer to do that? Does the workflow work as it is set up, or do we need to change anything? These are the things that we usually take a look once a year, but that can also, of course, be done whenever necessary, or if something seems to be going very well or very wrong. All right. That basically was the last part of my presentation, and I would like to start with the question section. Gregor, can you tell me if we have any questions so far?
Yes, we received 3 questions in total, and I would like to invite our attendees to ask further questions. We still have some minutes left, and the first question is from a copyright point of view. What is the situation for open access at Karger? Maybe this is a question which goes to Beth from the open access team.
Hi. For Karger, all our authors of open access papers keep their copyright. That's for every open access paper.
Okay. Thank you very much. And another question, also more a technical question. What kind of article types are covered by a publish and read agreement? Maybe this is a question for Julia.
That's a very good question. So generally speaking, that is something we determine together with the customer. So there are agreements that we have that are only valid for case reports, for example, because customers wanted to support the authors that want to publish case reports. We have agreements where letters or reviews are excluded from the rule. So basically, anything is possible, but that's something that we usually determine together with the customer that we're setting an agreement up with.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Julia. Then interesting financial political question. How is Karger's policy with open access in less developed countries?
I can say something about that.
Yeah.
We have an automatic waiver and discount program for authors from countries with lower and lower middle incomes. And we also sometimes give waivers or discounts on APCs on a case-by-case basis. So for example, a certain country with really pressing political and economic problems that's not actually on the official list of countries with lower and lower middle incomes. We have frequent queries from authors, and often we're able to help them with their open access publishing costs.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Sure. Yes, so far these were the questions from the audience. Thank you very much to all the people who asked questions and who participated, of course.
All right, thank you very much, Gregor. So we still do have a bit of time, but I would say I'm going to start with my thank yous. So I would like to thank the participants for their time and for their attention. It's very much appreciated. I would like to thank Enago and Tony. Thank you for participating.
Oh, Julia, I just received a question. Wow.
Oh, brilliant.
Very good question. Thank you for the interesting input. Publish and read agreements. What are the future plans for the transformation of journals to full open access, gold? Until when? How many journals are gold? How many are hybrid?
Ooh.
How many closed? I mean, closed maybe behind the paywall. Yeah. So there's a certain sense of emergency for urgence. Yeah. Sorry. Can you say something about that?
So I can maybe start, and maybe Beth can complete my train of thought. So as of now, we have 36 gold open access journals, and we have 69 hybrid journals.
That's about a third of the program.
Yeah. Do you want to say something about the speed that we're moving at?
Yes, we are very much open for open. We're veering towards embracing more open science policies and activities. It is a challenge, as Julia mentioned, that different regions, different markets, different institutions have varying positions on open access. So it's hard to say we're going to be full open access tomorrow, because we don't have all the authors who want to do that and all the institutions. So we would like to go in that direction, but we have to do it in a sort of paced, sustainable way. We will be flipping more journals. I can't say exactly how many or when, but yeah, as I said, sustainability is key. And we are also starting to initiate some transformative journals. They are compliant with Plan S, which is a kind of sweeping open access mandate from a group of funders. Most of them are in Europe, but there are also some in the US and elsewhere. But we have already started 2 journals that are transformational, and that means that they are committing to increasing the amount of open access content every year at which we can flip at a certain point. So we have this combination of flipping, the hybrid journals, which are actually all the subscription journals. So there are the 36 gold open access and all the rest are hybrid. And yeah, we will make the transition as fast as we can, but not at the cost of doing harm to our business or to our partners who aren't ready for that.
Yeah, can I just add one point, and that is, if we start new journals, they will always be gold open access journals. I hope that.
Yeah.
All right.
I would say, yeah.
If I can make just one
Very,
general
very, very
point.
likely, yeah.
If I may make one general point, I think the path is very clear towards open access. If you look the most recent announcements in the last few weeks around the acquisition of the open access publisher Hindawi by Wiley, really sets a marker in the ground in terms of where some of these very, very large publishers are thinking in terms of how their content and their models are going to transform. So I think we might be surprised how quickly things are going to start to develop, in my opinion.
I agree. Yep, very good point. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah,
all right.
Julia, so you will have the famous last words.
Oh yeah, sure. So once again, thank you very much for participating. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, which is probably longer than our day will be. And I hope to see you soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.